You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today, here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com, where a week ago, when I recorded this show, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen in the week ahead in Israeli politics. I had a pretty good guess. My pretty good guess was that there's no way the politicians would make us go through another election. They would find a way to work it out at the last minute. They would form a committee. They would agree to not talk about their differences until later on. But they would form a government. After all, this is Netanyahu. This is King Bibi. This is the man who can accomplish anything, who said out loud, recorded for everyone, when I want something, I know how to get it. Oh yeah? Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not true anymore. We're going to an election, ladies and gentlemen, and I didn't believe it until the last minute possible. I worked at the Knesset last Wednesday. The entire day, they're working on two different tracks. They're trying to build a government. They're working on the bill for initiating elections. And because of that, I had to write two different stories. I wrote a full story that you will never read anywhere about Israel avoiding elections and Israel forming a new government. I wrote it from beginning to end. It's there somewhere. It's unfortunately the ultimate in fake news, right? But you got to do what you got to do. You got to be ready for the news to happen, to break it at the exact second. That's the way it works with the internet nowadays. And I also wrote the entire story on Israel avoiding getting a government and going to an election. And I sent it in, and I hoped it wouldn't be used. And then it was 10:45, and so I left my office in the Knesset, and I went up the steps to where the Likud would be meeting at 11 o'clock at night. I saw that they were boxing in reporters near the room so they wouldn't get too close to the politicians, and I ran away. And I went to the door of the Knesset, where I knew that Netanyahu and his people would be coming in. And I waited by that door. And the first person to come in was Yariv Levin, the head of the Likud's negotiating team, the man in charge of forming the government, the man who's been negotiating for the last 6 weeks. And his words were, "Nu, ze nigmar." Well, it's over. And I still didn't believe it until his spokeswoman, Michal, said, "What can we do? We're going to elections." What can we do? There was still an hour left before the deadline. Why are you going to meet in the Likud and tell people that you gave up? Find some kind of defector or, get somebody to sit on Lieberman's head. But unfortunately, all of that had already been tried, and we've been finding out since then more and more that Netanyahu made a very serious effort to prevent an election. He really tried to buy off Avi Gabai, the leader of the Labour Party, who has no principles whatsoever, apparently. He offered him the finance ministry. He offered him the defense ministry. But Gabai has a team of Knesset members who do have principles and refused. Now, he claims that they only refused later on and whatever. Talking to them, I trust them and not him. I really think he wanted to join the government, and none of them did. He just realized he couldn't get away with it. But Netanyahu, to his credit, he really tried. He really made an effort to prevent an election from happening. So now we are questioning what's going to be happening ahead. We have an election coming up. Netanyahu ran in the last election using the slogan, strong Likud. Well, now we're going to an election based on the entire theory that Netanyahu is not as strong because we went to an election because of him. This, on the other hand, will make people say, well, I need to make Netanyahu stronger in order to govern. We can't let one politician be able to push him around like Avigdor Lieberman did. So we can look at what Avigdor Lieberman did in two different ways. We can look at it from the positive perspective that he was acting as a professional. He believes that bringing the ultra-Orthodox into the army is absolutely necessary for Israel's future. The ultra-Orthodox are 25% of Jewish first graders. The ultra-Orthodox are 10% of the population, of the Jewish population. That's how fast they're growing. In another 12 years, those first graders are going to be 18 years old, and the army will need them, and then the workforce will need them, and he's trying to prevent a serious problem. But on the other hand, there is the negative perspective of what Lieberman did, and that's that he wasn't really acting out of professional considerations. He knew when he passed the bill in its first reading that it was then going to be changed for the readings ahead. He knew that passing the bill then was already a compromise on the part of the ultra-Orthodox, and that no bill in the Knesset really passes automatically the way it is initiated. And so maybe Avigdor Lieberman really initiated this election out of hatred. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. The most powerful force in politics today is hatred. Lieberman does not like Netanyahu. Lieberman wanted to end Netanyahu's political career. Lieberman has suffered from Netanyahu for so many years since they worked together when Netanyahu just came back from his job as UN ambassador. They were already working together in the late 1980s, in the early 1990s. Netanyahu and Lieberman have been working together since the late 1980s. Lieberman was an activist in Likud, and Netanyahu came back from his job as UN ambassador to enter Israeli politics. And Lieberman was the man who would do his political work for him. Lieberman helped build Netanyahu up, and then since then they have been fighting. So we're going to an election, but because of that hatred, we're going to an election because Netanyahu was afraid of giving the ball back to the president, who could theoretically ask somebody else to form a government, but had no one else to give it to. And really, the ball would have been given back to Netanyahu shortly thereafter, without an election being initiated. But Netanyahu has this hatred of Rivlin, and Rivlin has this hatred of Netanyahu. Hate is a very powerful force. And because of hate, in part, we're going to end up having 6 million people go to vote again. It took Donald Trump to say on Sunday that Israel has to get their act together. Israel is all messed up with their election. I mean, that came out of the blue 3 days ago. So that's all messed up. They ought to get their act together, Trump told reporters on the White House lawn before he left for a trip to England. And he hit it right on the head, Donald Trump. But arguably, it's kind of ironic that he's saying that when he's on the way to England, where the politics are much more messed up. And he's saying that after leaving Washington, or on the way to leave Washington, where the politics are much more messed up than they are over here. And he's saying it half of the way around the world from Australia, where the politics are much more messed up than they are over here. And he might be flying later on over Austria, where the politics are much more messed up than they are over here. So yeah, I'll take it. But the theory of hatred is what describes a lot what's going on here. Netanyahu and Lieberman managed to coexist for a while. They even managed to form a party list called Likud Beitenu for one election which didn't do too well and ended up with them accusing each other of things instead of bringing Lieberman back into Likud permanently. Netanyahu reached out to Moshe Kachlon, leader of Kulanu. He was ready for him to join Likud. He was not ready for Lieberman to be joining the Likud. Now, there's also hatred that we saw on display on Sunday when Netanyahu saw Naftali Bennett come to a cabinet meeting for the first time since the April 9th election. And this made Netanyahu so angry. This was like, Haman seeing Mordechai, if we're allowed to make any comparisons between Netanyahu and Haman. We're only doing it in this. No, he's not trying to destroy the Jewish people. Just pure hatred. He saw him and told his staff immediately call him when he's on the way out of the room to fire him. And that's what he did. He wanted to make sure that if Naftali Bennett is showing up to a cabinet meeting, that he's not going to show up to a security cabinet meeting. And so the security cabinet meeting was set for Wednesday, 48 hours after the firing, to make sure that Naftali Bennett wouldn't come in case there was 15 minutes left before the firing took effect. To fire somebody on the phone, then that's like breaking up with somebody on the phone when you're dating. That's just like bad etiquette. So at least he didn't fire him by fax, which Ehud Barak did when he became leader of the Labour Party and fired Amir Peretz, who was defense minister, by fax. And so now you have Naftali Bennett saying on Sunday night that he's going to be running with the New Right Party again, that he formed, maybe shift it from having a negative focus to more of a positive one, try to woo the Likud voters who are upset with Netanyahu and with Kachlon and have nowhere else to go. Try to woo the Likud voters who are upset with Netanyahu and with Lieberman and have nowhere else to go now that Kachlon has joined with Netanyahu. But Ayelet Shaked, while I'm recording this show on Monday, nobody knows where she is going to go. She thought that maybe she'd be joining Likud. There were a lot of people pushing in Likud for her to be allowed to join there. She does have electoral value. As not just I'm saying, but leaders of Likud were saying that she would increase the size of Likud along with taking a seat, not take a seat and not win that seat back. But when it all comes down to it, there is hatred, ladies and gentlemen, and Sarah Netanyahu hates Ayelet Shaked, and according to one report, told her husband when she overheard him talking about the possibility of Ayelet Shaked receiving a reserved slot on the Likud list, she walked into this professional meeting and said, Ayelet Shaked will not be running in Likud, period. Now that hatred between Ayelet and Sarah goes way back. Ayelet also used to work for Netanyahu. She was his bureau chief. And Ayelet had a dispute over money. She wanted to get paid for her work. And Sarah Netanyahu did not want to have Netanyahu be paying for anyone to work for him beyond the 2 assistants that he got as the leader of the opposition. And Netanyahu wanted to have 4 assistants, and so he was paying people out of pocket, which is something that politicians do, especially wealthy politicians. And Sarah Netanyahu reportedly said, "She's taking food out of the mouth of my sons." And later on, Naftali Bennett actually said on television that him and Ayelet went through terror under Sarah Netanyahu. And Sarah Netanyahu said a couple years ago that she thought that Netanyahu's career is almost over, and that is something that is not being forgiven, apparently. So Ayelet is now a free agent. She certainly can run with the New Right again, but it's a very big risk because they didn't cross the threshold in April. there could be some kind of bond with the Union of Right-Wing Parties. Rabbi Druckmann, one of the leaders of religious Zionism, is pushing for that bond to happen. But Bezalel Smotrich, who became the leader while Naftali and Ayelet were away, was saying not very welcoming things on Sunday on the radio. He was saying, well, she definitely can't be number one. She left, she divided us, she destroyed, she failed, and we're going to elections not just because of Lieberman, but also because of them, Ayelet and Naftali. If they would have ran together with us last time, we would have at least gotten a couple more seats, and that would have been enough for Netanyahu to be able to form a nice right-wing government without Avigdor Lieberman. So I can understand that bitterness, but, why, according to that theory, not be more welcoming to Naftali and Ayelet now and tell them we want you with open arms. Please come back. You're going to be the ones who help put Netanyahu over the top. But in the end, they're jostling for position. Bezalel Smotrich wants to be the justice minister. He doesn't want Ayelet to be above him and be the justice minister. And there are going to be a lot of negotiations ahead in that party to figure out who is who and what that list is going to be. It was hard enough when they were away for Bezalel Smotrich and Rafi Peretz, who took over as the head of Bayit Yehudi, to figure out who would be first on their list and who would receive the first portfolios. So that is part of what we're going to be reporting on in the Jerusalem Post over the next few weeks. But the biggest fight that we'll be reporting on in the Jerusalem Post is the election for leader of the Labour Party. And I love elections for leader of the Labour Party. I've become quite good at covering them, I think, now that I'm doing my 9th one. Who would have thought that the Labour Party would have 9 elections since 2001, since Ehud Barak had to quit as prime minister. They've tried everyone imaginable. They've tried to bring in generals. They've tried to bring in businessmen. They've tried to bring in people from the periphery, like Amir Peretz. They've tried to bring in a woman in Sheli Yachimovich. Nothing has worked. More and more Labour Party voters have died, and the younger people don't have this natural affiliation to the party that their grandparents had, and so they're going in different directions. The latest Jerusalem Post poll that we ran in the paper on Friday found that Labour would not even cross the electoral threshold. The party that founded the state, ladies and gentlemen, would not cross the electoral threshold, would not even get 140,000 votes. Wow. Well, Avi Gabay is apparently not the man to lead the party after going down from 24 seats from a million voters to just less voters than the Hadash Ta'al party in the April 9th elections. So the Knesset members that are left there are all going to be running, apparently. Stav Shafir is going to run. Itzik Shmuley is going to run. Amir Peretz is going to run. Eitan Kabel, who was in the Knesset until April, is apparently going to be running. Former Knesset member Danny Atom talks about running. Current head of the Karen Kayemet in Israel, Danny Attar, is considering running. All this for a party that in the polls is getting 0 seats. People are running for the right to lead a party that has no support at all, which is pretty incredible. But a lot of it is just mercy. They want to make sure that somebody will take over from Avi Gabay after he did so bad as leader of the party and after he blamed them, saying that they were involved in his effort to join Netanyahu's government, after he said in every single speech during the campaign that he would be the one who wouldn't negotiate with Netanyahu, where he called on Benny Gantz and the leaders of Blue and White to announce that they wouldn't sit with Netanyahu. His entire campaign was this campaign of hatred against Netanyahu, and here he was willing to join Netanyahu's government. So I can understand why Itzik Shmuley, who was number 2 in labor after Avi Gabay, before Avi Gabay brought in a general named Tal Russo to be in between them on the list, said, "My blood is boiling." But he added, "But I still have respect for the institution of Labor Party leaders, so I'm not going to attack Gabay." And so that election is apparently going to be held on July 2nd, and we'll be talking about it between now and then here on this show. What I'd like to end the show with is a theory of why we went to an election beyond all the other reasons that I've already said, which is David Ben-Gurion. Yes, we can blame things on our first prime minister. We can blame things on him, just like we said with Lieberman, for professional reasons and not so professional reasons. The professional reason we can blame this on David Ben-Gurion is that David Ben-Gurion had a meeting with the leader of ultra-Orthodox Jewry, who was known as the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Karelitz, who asked Ben-Gurion, he said, "We have 400 yeshiva students who are learning Torah full-time. These are going to be the Torah teachers of tomorrow. Please let them avoid army service." And so Ben-Gurion said, "Fine, what's the big deal, 400? But he didn't put into the exemption, he didn't put any limit at the time. And that's how you end up with 40,000 people now learning Torah full-time, which is a very big drain on the economy and on Israeli society. So, Ben-Gurion, part of this is your fault. But there's another way that it's his fault. Well, Netanyahu is going to pass up David Ben-Gurion next month as the prime minister who served the longest in office. In the amount, when you're counting it by the amount of days and by the amount of years that he served in office. But what about the amount of terms? Ben-Gurion served 8 terms in office, and Netanyahu has only served 5. So my theory is that Netanyahu is trying to have 3 elections, boom, 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 right after the other, and pass up Ben-Gurion and make his way into the history books. It's just as likely a theory as any of the other theories you might have heard. Maybe that's why 6 million of us are going to have to go out and vote again. As I said last week, we'll be smarter when we're sitting here next week. That's the beauty of Israeli democracy. Inside Israel Today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day from Jerusalem. Bye-bye. What in the world is going on in Israeli politics, and how does this relate to the holiday of Shavuot and to Israel being in its 71st year of independence? Find out by attending my VIP briefing. This is Gil Hoffman, host of Inside Israel Today, and I hope to see you there at the Shavuot of a lifetime, at the Mount Zion Hotel, at lunchtime on Shabbat.
Shavuot of a lifetime, Thursday through Monday, June 6th through 10th, 2019. For more information, visit thelandofisrael.travel. That's thelandofisrael.travel.